You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, also news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we look at our favorite family films. And now, here's Steve.
Hi, guys. What a fun subject. I think all of us are going to go back to our youth. And I use the phrase specifically because I'm a big fan, Fred Gwynn, from My Cousin Vinny. But I'd like to start out with a young lady who completely dazzled me when I was little because she was probably the first live action star I saw on TV because I was watching cartoons. And that was Shirley Temple. I think her movies were so charming. And I was trying to make a list of them today. Films like Wee Willie Winkie, Little Miss Marker, Little Miss Broadway, The Little Princess, Heidi. These were really popular films in the 30s. And as I'll defer to you, Julian, because you know how impactful Shirley Temple's movies were for Fox.
It was very important, Steve, because she became the most important star for Fox. She was the one that actually brought in the money. She saved the studio in many years. It was very interesting when they were going to make The Wizard of Oz. The people at MGM went to Zanuck to try to get Shirley Temple. Judy Garland was not their first choice. It was Shirley Temple. And in essence, Zanuck told them to take a hike. He wasn't going to give them. And in those days, they liked to lend it out. They'd make money. You know, they would be paying a contract player, let's say $4,000 a week, and they'd send them out and get $10,000 a week. The contract player didn't get the six difference. The studio did. So, but there was no chance that they were going to give Shirley Temple up. So back to you, Steve, and Shirley.
Well, I was looking at some of the interesting facts about Shirley. Here's an interesting fact. Did you know that both Shirley MacLaine and Shirley Jones were named after Shirley Temple?
I did not.
There you go.
And that makes sense, though. That makes sense.
And Shirley, as much as she was paid, I guess she had her contract renewed at $50,000 a film. So in 1935, that was probably a lot of money. But in terms of profits, her movies generated over $3 million to the studio. This is just an initial theatrical. She only had $45,000 added to her trust. So she was getting very little profit from those movies. But
you should have seen the accountants at the film company. Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. They were working overtime to avoid paying her. But her movies just stood out. I mean, I mentioned Wee Willie Winkie. I mean, she worked with John Ford, who generally did not like working with women. He was kind of a man's director. Maybe Maureen O'Hara was probably an exception because he respected her. But they got along really well. And Wee Willie Winkie, based on the Rudyard Kipling short story, it was a high point. If you remember the film, Cesar Romero, who was always playing exotic types, played a Afghan prince. And I always remember the relationship between little Shirley. I mean, was there ever a more charming performer, guys, than Shirley Temple?
No. And of course, the idea that she would dance with either Buddy Ebsen or the wonderful Bojangles Robinson, Bill Robinson. She could dance, she could sing, she could act. And then she became an ambassador to the UN. But she was a lady then.
Well, she was also, you must say, a humongous talent. She was an incredible talent at the age of 4 or 5, whatever it was. She was great. Shirley Temple was all-time great.
And she, her career did not last long. Once she got into late teenagers, early 20s, she appeared opposite John Agar in one of my favorite John Ford Westerns, Fort Apache. in 1949, and that's I believe that's where she met her husband, and who was during World War II was a physical fitness trainer, and they had a very short-lived marriage, but they had a child. And then, of course,
where would you put John Agar on the list of all-time great actors? Excuse me, guys.
Only if you were going in alphabetical order.
Right.
I got to meet him at Showtime back in the 90s. Very nice man. He was relegated to kind of secondary roles. It's funny because John Agar, who kind of was the fair-haired boy with John Ford for a couple of films, both Fort Apache and She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, later started appearing in science fiction films. And although it wasn't a family film, he scared the hell out of me in a film called The Brain from the Planet Eris, mid-50s. Very scary movie with a brain running around. But you mentioned earlier, Julian, The Wizard of Oz. I would have to say that if you had to list the top family films of all time, number one would have to be The Wizard of Oz. I know we're going to be doing fantasy films down the road, but as far as family films go, The Wizard of Oz would be my number one. Also because, as you recall, it ended up being, I think CBS purchased the long-term television rights, and it became an event on television for decades.
Yes, that's what happens to certain movies that maybe didn't do great and well, but there was an example of a film that went into the public domain, the wonderful Jimmy Stewart, It's a Wonderful Life movie. It had died. It was a film that Capra made. It did not do well, but they started, because it was public domain, they could play it for nothing. Television stations started playing it. It became a huge, huge movie. And finally, some intelligent lawyer said, wait a second, we can copyright the underlying rights, and they can't do that anymore. And they did. So that was no longer a public domain movie. It's interesting, that kind of thing. Back to Shirley just for a moment. She became older, and she made a movie with the great Cary Grant called The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer. And that movie was written by a huge best-selling novelist named Sidney Sheldon. But before he sold novels, he was writing movies. He also co-wrote Easter Parade. So he was quite something before he did The Other Side of Midnight, which Arthur and I know a lot about.
Do we ever? I saw The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer as a kid in the Borscht Belt during the summer. My folks were up in the summer. Wizard of Oz, which really did not do well initially at the box office, like other films, maybe not as big as Wizard of Oz, found this afterlife forever. It was absolutely forever. I remember we played it at a morning show in the Harvest Square on a Sunday morning, and we sold out 2,000 seats at about 10 o'clock in the morning for a kids matinee, sort of where, but the folks would bring them. And I took my daughter to see The Wizard of Oz. And so it's great stuff. At the time, she must have been maybe 6 or 7 years old. And now it comes to a point in the movie where the lion goes jumping through the window or something. And she says to me, Daddy, let's go out and get some candy. I said, why? She said, because there's going to be an ad. This was in the movie theater. She was used to seeing it on television. And she knew that at that point there was an ad, you see.
Well, she predicted the future.
Yes, well, she did. But you know what? What's become a great afterlife movie? I happen to love Marty Short. I think he's just one of the all-time great funny guys. This movie, Clifford, which was a disaster in the theaters, has now become a hit in afterlife. And he's hysterical. I mean, if you really just isolate. The guy who wrote that movie, for whatever it's worth, was my son's Little League coach in the Pacific Palisades, Steve Campman. God bless him.
And Charles Grodin is sensational.
Charlie Grodin is great in the movie. But Marty Short's unbelievable in that film. Really did nothing, initially at the box office. But again, found that afterlife. It's a wonderful life, like you said, Steve.
Well, look at
my God.
the Ten Commandments has locked in Easter for decades. They have,
But Ten Commandments at the box office was huge.
It was a big hit.
Yeah.
It was a big hit.
Yeah.
What was not a big hit, and one of my favorite all-time movies, and I try to get the rights for a musical on Broadway, is The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride did not do well, but it became huge on video cassette. And I recently got to know and spoke to Chris Sarandon, who played Prince Humperdinck, and I was asking him about Andre the Giant, the great wrestler, and he told me how kind a man he was. But Princess Bride was written by Bill Goldman, who I knew very well, who wrote Butch Cassidy and All the President's Men.
I bet you had him on your show, I would think.
Oh, yes. Bill was on my show. He was on Witnesses. He was very outspoken. He had no qualms about going after major stars, writing about it. He was quite a guy. He really was quite a man. But that was some movie. I mean, Princess Bride, I hope you guys all liked it as much as I did.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
It's a cult film
Classic
also.
movie.
People love that film.
I want to mention you guys, interesting enough, that our subject is family movies. So at the end of 1967, just beginning 1968, I was the sales manager of United Artists in Washington, D.C., and they promoted me to Boston to become the Boston branch manager. So the movies I inherited that I came with, I made a little list just to get a kick, until a family movie rescued our ass. I mean, completely. But here is some. United Artists was the hottest film company in the world up to the mid-'60s, a little bit beyond the mid-'60s. It kind of ended in the heat of the night with the Academy Award. It was Lilies of the Field. There was Tom Jones.
From Here to Eternity. That was Columbia.
That was earlier.
Columbia.
Come the late 60s, UA became cold. And so I inherited the following movies. Meaning as I came into the Boston branch, I was looking at movies like Operation Kid Brother, Clam Bake, Kill a Dragon, Navajo Joe with a young Burt Reynolds. Live for Life, Billion Dollar Brain, Fitzwillie, which was supposed to be a hit, died with
Dick Van Dyke.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, of course, was a big hit for everybody, but a different kind of movie. The Wicked Dreams of Paul Schultz. I think that was Eddie Small, no?
I don't know, but I think it was the girl who was doing Chrysler commercials or something.
You're right, but
something.
That title, The Wicked Dreams of Paula Schultz, one of the great titles, actually made the movie do a little business. But it would be an Eddie Small kind of movie, right?
Sure.
Kind of movies.
Yeah.
And then we had something called Danger Route. I forget what the hell it was, and I had it. The Scalp Hunters, with pretty good movie with Burt Lancaster. We had The Party, a wonderful underrated film from Blake Edwards with Peter Sellers, a hysterical movie. Didn't really do business. And then along came this little thing called Yours, Mine, and Ours. Family movie all the way. Great little movie. So the audience knows it was made for $2.5 million and grossed in those days $25 million. That's a family film. And when you get a family film that's successful, at the theater, you kill them at the concession stand because the kids always have to have something to eat. Power of a family film is as great a genre as there is in the film business. We can talk about Sound of Music. We can talk about Mary Poppins. All those Disney titles, the classic titles.
By the way, Arthur, excuse me for interrupting, but I just wanted to confirm that the producer of The Wicked Dreams of Paula Schultz was Edward Small.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
No, there's no question. When you're talking about The Sound of Music or Mary Poppins, and Julie Andrews, of course, starred in both of them, you're talking about gigantic grosses. I mean, grosses that were unheard of 10 years before. They were just gigantic, and two terrific movies as well. Chris Plummer supposedly called it The Sound of Mucus, but he then said he didn't say it. But who knows? Well,
what did Variety call it, Julian? What did Variety call it in the full-page ad? The Sound of Money.
Sound of Money. Yeah.
That movie was released in 1965. I did not see it till 1977. For some reason, it just was not a movie I ran to. I was not into musicals, but I saw it in London at the British Film Institute. and I completely fell in love with that movie. I went nuts. So when I got back to California, I sold the LA Times on the idea of an article, Where Are All the Sound of Music Children? And so I tracked down every one of them, including the kid who played Rolf, the guy who becomes a Nazi, remember?
Yes.
And when I interviewed him by telephone. He wanted me to insist on letting everybody know that after the movie, he joined the Marines. But that had a great cast.
But Steve, what you said before, The Sound of Music, Mary Poppins, something that big. If you live in a household with kids 2, 3 years old, and the grandmother and grandfather, 75, 80, whatever, the whole family can go to that movie and love it. And that's one of the beauties of a great family movie is the entire family can go and have a great time and talk about it at dinner and at Thanksgiving and whatever. But it's a wonderful genre, which we don't have enough of these days, guys.
Well, I would argue
we should talk about that. You know?
We don't have an. I think it's kind of an axiom that animation takes up the bulk of family viewing now. If there's going to be a theatrical release of a family movie, generally it's an animated film. And of course, this past few weeks, we've had huge hits in that genre. The sequel to Inside Out for Pixar is one of the biggest films of the year.
Well, we should isolate animated, don't you think?
No, I don't want to talk about animated films because you're right, it's a separate thing. But I think as a writer, as Julian, as you all know, I've been working in family film ideas for a while, and they're very hard to sell. I don't know why, but live action family films are tough to sell. I mean, if you ask the average person on the street to name a live action family film of the last 20 years, sometimes it's hard to name one. I'll throw one out that was a big hit, spawned 2 sequels. Night at the Museum with Ben Stiller. Big hit.
20 years ago, Steve?
Almost. Yeah. That movie was just charming. And that's a word you don't hear that much anymore in movies. They just charmed your socks off. Another one, which has become a perennial for me and just nailed the family audience, is School of Rock. School of Rock, just a fun movie.
Yeah,
wonderful movie.
That was a terrific film. I want to say that during this period we were talking about with Sound of Music and a lot of other films making money, my old friend, the producer, Joseph E. Levine, told me, he said, I had to get into the business of it. He said, so I made 7 family movies. And then he would pause and say, my own family didn't go see them.
Well,
I had a film that I wouldn't be surprised if I'm the only one of the 4 who even saw it. And I loved it, and it was great. And I'll never know what happened, but the movie was called Hugo. Did anybody see it?
Hugo?
Yes, sir.
Well, there was a more recent movie, but that was an animated movie.
No, this is a movie made by a guy who makes gangster movies. He produced and directed it, named Martin Scorsese.
It was a wonderful film. It really was.
There you go, Mike. I was wrong. One of the 3 did see it. Yeah.
It was beautiful because it dealt with a lot of the beginning of film.
Are we talking about the Lumiere brothers?
Yeah.
Well, they're
part of that story,
yes. But it's George Menzies, and
is this with Sacha Baron Cohen?
Yes.
Oh, then I've seen it. Of course, I've seen it.
It's a beautiful film.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, in 2011, or I don't know when, maybe around then, anyhow, it was nominated for the most Academy Awards of any movie that year. 11 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture of the Year. Oh. And it didn't win. It won a lot in cinematography and set design, and it's a terrific film. Very quickly, a young boy, so of course, right off the bat, it's great for kids. Young boy lives in the railroad station where the clocks are. He's inside the clocks, and there's a mystery that takes place. When Marty first made it, he made it, believe it or not, in 3D. And I had not seen it in 3D. I saw it regular way. And because I'm a member of the Academy, they had a special 3D screening. And I had to see the movie again. And it didn't mean a damn thing in 3D. I don't know what he was thinking, what they were thinking, but it didn't mean anything. The film was very expensive. It cost, though they have the different estimates between 150 and 170 million dollars. And sadly, worldwide, it grossed only 185. And we know that a gross of 185 may mean 90, 95 came in. So they lost a lot of money. I hope eventually they'll come out on it.
There was a family movie that Warner Brothers had early in the 1990s that they were very, very skeptical of. And once it started going over budget, they told the producers, look, either you stop with the thing with the budget or we're getting rid of this thing. And he couldn't stop. They needed more money and Warner's wouldn't pay for it at that time. By the way, every studio makes mistakes. This was a big mistake. They let the picture go for what was going to cost an extra $1 million. And they let the picture go. It was called Home Alone. Talk about family movie hits. Went on to do over $1 billion worth of business at, I believe, 20th Century Fox. Steve, is that right?
Yep.
Home Alone?
That's a 20th Century Fox film.
Every studio will have that kind of a story, I think. I do believe. We've all made the mistake, and, studios make the mistake. But this was really a Lollapalooza. Because after all, you can't spend an extra $1 million. It's a family film. It's just limited to what it could do. No, it's not. Limited films like family movies. Steven Spielberg is probably the king of family movies like E.T., Back to the Future. Even though Zemeckis did it, Spielberg was, I believe, the producer. He was the
producer.
And so the family film is, when you hit it, it's huge. The fact of the matter is that we don't really have scripted family film. Where's Cheaper by the Dozen? Father of the Bride. The Parent Trap did business, I believe.
It's funny, all those movies you just mentioned were all remade.
Yours, Mine, and Ours was remade too.
Yeah, in fact, Father of the Bride features Marty Short again. Marty Short as the wedding planner.
And Steve Martin.
Well, Marty Short had that great little role, yes.
I'd like to mention sports family movies, which I think we all remember vividly. The first version of Angels in the Outfield was made in the 50s with Paul Douglas and Janet Leigh, 1951.
And Forbes Field, Pittsburgh. And then they remade it at California Angels Stadium with Danny Glover, and I think that was also a hit. And then, of course, we have the Bad News Bears. Although the Bad News Bears has some language in it.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't consider that a kids' movie.
Not really a kids' movie.
No.
But Rookie
movie. Bad News Bears was a big kids' movie. Please. Huge hit.
But if you...
Stanley Jaffe left Paramount and he took with him Bad News Bears. It hit the entire family, but mostly kids.
Well, I think over 10 maybe, because when I sat down with my 6 and 8-year-old to watch that, we had to turn it off because of the language. But I'm thinking of some other sports movies. Rookie of the Year, and I'm paying a lot of attention to that lately. Because
but there was also The Sandlot, if you remember.
Sandlot was huge.
But the reason I mentioned Rookie of the Year, since I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, and since it takes place at Wrigley, the actress who played the mother in Rookie of the Year, whose name I forget, but her son now is on the Cubs. His name is Pete Crow Armstrong, considered one of the fastest runners in Major League Baseball. Rookie of the Year was about a kid who ends up playing for the Cubs. But I'll go all the way back to the 50s, one of the first movies I ever saw. And here's one I doubt if any of you have seen it. Have you ever heard of Rugi's Bump?
No, sir.
No.
Republic Pictures, I think it was 1952 or 51. And it's about a kid who develops a bump on his arm, which makes him the fastest pitcher in the major leagues. And I think that was somewhat similar to Rookie of the Year, but that was featuring the Brooklyn Dodgers of 1951, Rugi's Bump.
One of the great gimmick movies that was a wonderful movie of the 50s was It Happens Every Spring. Also with Paul Douglas, where the Ray Milland or something, and he
didn't he develop a formula for?
It was allergic to wood, so he throws the pitch over the plate, and a guy swings the bat, and the pitch jumps off. The ball jumps off because it cannot be attracted to wood. Nice little movie, you know.
Nice little movie, which I'm sure inspired the writers over at Disney to do a movie called Flubber.
Oh yes,
and then there was
Fred McMurray.
I think the original title of the movie, the original movie was called The Absent-Minded Professor. And then the sequel was called Son of Flubber. And I think that's also a remake because I think Robin Williams remade it as a Flubber movie.
It's interesting, though, because, you know, another one that was a flop when it first came out, but gained notoriety because of television and then home video was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Back in the early 70s, it stunk it up at the theater. It was, you know, Gene Wilder actually even thought about quitting acting because of that.
Beautiful movie.
Yeah.
How that possibly could stink up the box office makes no sense unless they were selling bad popcorn.
Exactly. And it did not catch an audience. And it started getting notoriety when they started showing it on television, and then when they, you know, started doing re-releases of it, and it just gained notoriety, and now it's beloved. It's a cult film in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and the Candyman.
Exactly. Sammy, we talked about him last week.
We did indeed.
So,
well, let's talk in terms of the very first movie I was taken to as a little boy, and my grandmother took me there. And in the middle of the movie, I started to cry, and I was hysterical. The movie was Bambi, and they shoot Bambi's mother. Now, what the hell was Walt Disney and his animators thinking about to shoot the mother of the lead? Anyhow, I was inconsolable. I never saw the end of Bambi, but I did go to Horn and Hardart across the street, had some baked beans and mashed potatoes, and forgot about it.
But the fact is that Walt Disney and his genius scared a lot of kids with a lot of movies.
Very much so.
Mirror, mirror on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
It's a kind of a rule of thumb. Isn't it a rule of thumb in every Disney movie that there cannot be two live parents?
Pretty much. And
There were scary stuff. Yeah. Pinocchio was terrifying.
Pinocchio was.
Oh, it's interesting, though, because, you know, Disney had the huge run with all the animated films, but they also did a huge series of live action films for the family. And all the way from, you know, the mid 50s on. And they, you know, one of the first movies I ever remembered going to see at a drive-in with my parents was Herbie the Love Bug in, like, I think 1969.
Big hit.
Yeah.
Well,
and terrific film.
Yeah.
Really a wonderful movie.
Speaking of being inconsolable, you know, how about watching Old Yeller as a kid?
Sure, of course.
There wasn't a dry eye in every house. And that was a Disney live action movie. I think Fess Parker was the lead. And oh my God, and they had a lot of Disney movies with animals. I remember one called The Incredible Journey, which was a story of a Labrador retriever, a Siamese cat, and a Boston retriever. No, a Boston Terrier. And they've got to cross Canada to get back to their home. And talk about a harrowing adventure film. That was pretty crazy.
Well, I don't know that I ever cried more than a Lassie Come Home as a kid.
Lassie Come Home, the Lassie movies.
Of course, then you also had Swiss Family Robinson. You had 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You know, you had some amazing stuff.
The Three Lives of Thomasina.
Yeah.
About a cat, absolutely.
But of all of them, my favorite is The Jungle Book because of the great number that Louis Prima and Phil Harris team up to sing The Bare Necessities. Fantastic. If you haven't seen and heard The Bare Necessities, you're missing out on something that's incredible in life. The Jungle Book. Phil Harris and Louis Prima together again.
Phil Harris is one of those great showman entertainers who no one remembers. We do, of course. Again, as kids, maybe we heard him on the radio, but he was fantastic in nightclubs and Vegas. But he was wonderful on radio and early TV. But he's, again, one of those names that's forgotten, but a great, great showman, entertainer. Guys, again, we're talking about family movies here. In this case, we still haven't mentioned Singing in the Rain. Great family movie.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can go see it.
No question
the
about
original Stanley Donen I became friendly with, and he told me this original story that Camden and Green were going to put together was going to be about an old, washed-up cowboy who was out in the movies, couldn't make it, and became this huge singing cowboy star. That was going to be the original concept, not a vaudeville guy like Gene Kelly was, and they wanted Howard Keel to be the lead.
Oh,
God. I'm so glad that wasn't made. I mean, Peter Bogdanovich on his morning video show on one of the morning shows said that Singing in the Rain was the most upbeat, most ebullient musical of all time, and I can't disagree with him.
And it wasn't a success initially.
Which is shocking. It wasn't even nominated for any Oscars.
That's right. That's right. And it was done by Dory Sherry, not by Louis B. Mayer. It was Dory Sherry who approved it for Arthur Freed, who was the head of that division of MGM making musicals.
And I know that Gene Kelly didn't want Debbie Reynolds at first. He wanted Sid Charisse to play the young girl. And Debbie Reynolds, when she comes to MGM in 52, is not a dancer. And he turned her into a dancer. Apparently he would often make her cry with the amount of incessant training he demanded.
Steve, I read her autobiography. It's a great book, by the way, for everybody. She bled. She almost died working for Gene Kelly. Was the toughest taskmaster, but she wasn't the dancer, and he taught her. And she was chosen by Louis B. Mayer to do it. She was a little girl from Burbank. She lives in, a lot of people.
Well, she had made a couple of movies before that.
Well, but by Louis, she was discovered by MGM.
Carlton Carpenter and things like that.
I would argue,
right? But the point, something that's interesting to the audience, I think. So many movie stars come from places like Burbank or Glendale or Hollywood, or they live there and they discovered there. And a lot of people refer to Hollywood as a factory town. A friend of mine once called it Detroit with sun. The environment of it is it's a factory town. And so a lot of the movie stars come from that area. When they were there as kids and they discovered there as kids in high school play or something like that. Interesting.
I would argue that the teaming of Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor on camera was one of the best teams ever. And even though I think they only did the one movie, they were so terrific. But speaking of Donald O'Connor goes over to Universal, and one of their big hits series of that period was Francis the Talking Mule. That was keeping Universal in the black. And then at the same time they were doing Francis and the Talking Mule movies, they were doing the Ma and Pa Kettle, the rural comedies. And those, I think the powers, I think I read that Lou Wasserman, when they acquired Universal, I guess there was a MCA bought Universal Pictures, they wanted to upgrade the quality of the movies. So the only thing keeping Universal afloat in the 50s were those film series.
And Francis the Talking Mule gave birth to Mr. Ed on television.
Gave birth to
That's
Mr.
right.
Ed. And
who was the voice of the Talking Mule?
Chill Wills.
Good man. Absolutely.
And who was the head of the Christian Science Church for so many years? We lived in Boston at Prudential Center, high above Boston, high above the Back Bay. And you could look down and see the Christian Science home office, so-called their Vatican, a beautiful church. And who was the head of it? Alan Young from Mr. Ed.
Oh, Mr. Ed, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, how about that? Guys, we haven't mentioned a movie called Mrs. Doubtfire. Talk about a family hit. Wow.
Big family hit, of course.
Very much so.
I mean, Robin Williams, if you think about it, he's done some R-rated stuff, But a lot of the success of Robin Williams was in movies that you take the whole family to. I mean, he's in the remake of Flubber. We talked about that. He's in the Spielberg movie Hook, which is another big family movie, although I don't think Hook did very well.
No, it got the hook.
It did enough. Excuse me. It did enough, guys. It was profitable.
There was another movie that he did called Toys. Also,
Toys. Barry Levinson, isn't that Barry Levinson?
Sure is.
Yep.
Yeah. With Arthur being involved with distribution. Oh boy, Toys. Oh.
Now, what was the problem with Toys, Arthur?
I think the problem with Toys, look, Barry really made bad movies. This was just one of those things that was flat and didn't play well. Unfortunately, it had some nice moments. Had a gorgeous set that they built for that movie, but just one of those things that Michael Gambon was in that, I believe. But it just didn't play. It played flat. What am I going to say? That happens. It can't be that. I don't care what it is in entertainment. If it's a Broadway show, if it's a television show, if it's a movie, it can't be boring. And when it is, it doesn't work.
Sometimes when certain actors move genres, they cross over. I mean, we know today that Tom Cruise is a huge international action star. He did not a little movie for Ridley Scott called Legend. It was a fantasy movie, certainly a family movie about fantastical creatures, and that didn't do very well. But it's
there's no guarantee, no matter what in the show business. You can put the biggest names into things and doesn't guarantee it. Alfred Hitchcock was about to make his 50th movie. They hired the number one male box office star in the world, Paul Newman. They hired the number one female box office star in the world, Julie Andrews, and they made Torn Curtain.
And that curtain should have stayed closed.
It was ripped apart. But Joe Levine, I mentioned earlier, he was going to buy a movie in Italy, and we flew to Italy to see the movie. No one had seen it. It was with Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling. And then we went to London, where Joe Levine met the press. And a very rather cultured woman reporter said, Mr. Levine, would you call The Night Porter a family film? And Joe Levine immediately said, it depends on your family, dear. The Night Porter was a kind of a sadomasochistic movie.
Isn't there something to do with Nazis in The Night Porter?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was. It was really that was the last thing you'd call a family movie.
No. Charlotte Rampling, Julian?
Charlotte Rampling and Dirk Bogarde, yeah.
I always thought that Dirk Bogarde was French, but he's very British.
Very, very British, yes. He was not French, Steve.
Yes, he's in a movie called So Long at the Fair, which I just saw for the first time, a Gene Simmons movie from 1952, and it co-starred Dirk Bogarde. And they are so charming on screen together. The studio was thinking of doing a whole series of movies with Gene Simmons and Dirk Bogarde as the screen's newest couple. I guess they were going for that Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor approach from later. But unfortunately, Gene Simmons got very involved with Stuart Granger. So there was no romance with Dirk Bogarde. And then, of course, it was revealed later on that Dirk Bogarde was gay. So that was that.
Oh, I know we're talking about family movies today mostly, but you mentioned the name Gene Simmons. Just to throw something out at you guys, did you all find her sexy? I did.
I sure very did. Sexy. Did you see her bathing in Spartacus? She's just very sexy.
She was great. Not known for that, by the way, but she was known for that. Patricia Neal,
Now, another actor who I think kind of embodies family movies of the 60s is Don Knotts. Don Knotts was in a series of movies where he played some very funny characters. Now, he was in a semi-animated movie. It's partially animated, partially live action, called The Incredible Mr. Limpet, where he turns into a fish.
He was a fish.
Exactly. Henry Limpet becomes a fish and helps win World War II by battling German U-boats. He's also in, the the Mr. Chicken. It's kind of there's always a ghostly fright movie involving families. So this one was something about Mr. Chicken.
Was he with an apple dumpling gang? Was he in that?
Yes.
A series of those with Tim Conway.
Tim Conway.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Milton Berle said the following about Don Knotts. You won't believe this, but he's probably one of the greatest coxmen that ever walked into Hollywood. He was a lover.
Don Knotts. Well,
Don Knotts, yes. Nope.
Well,
now these days, I mentioned Tom Cruise going into a fantasy movie. Often they'll take the macho of the macho actors and they'll put him in a very soft movie. Dave Bautista, who's been in a lot of big action movies, he's in those Guardians of the Galaxy movies. He's in a series of movies called My Spy, where he plays a spy and gets involved with a family. And then, let's see, what is his name? He's the bald-headed guy from the Fast and Furious movies.
Vin Diesel.
Vin Diesel is in a movie. Mike, is it called The Nanny? I think it's called The Nanny.
Yep. But then you also have, of course, Dwayne Johnson, who's one of the biggest movie stars out there right now.
Right.
He did a movie called The Tooth Fairy.
The Tooth Fairy.
But then he also was huge, and I do mean huge, in Moana.
Wow, right.
Exactly. As my wife says, is there nothing that man cannot do? He could sing, he could dance, he can act, and he could, of course, wrestle. So it's pretty just amazing how talented that gentleman is.
Yes.
No, he's a star.
Yeah.
He's one of the few stars there is.
one of the movies we haven't talked about was a musical that was huge when it came out, based on a Broadway play called Grease.
Oh,
Grease
sure.
is the word.
Grease is the word.
And boy, that was something. I tried very hard to get the film rights to that. I think I might have mentioned that to Arthur one day. Obviously unsuccessful. I don't know if I would have made a movie as good as that. It was really a terrific film. Hugh Jackman, Greatest Showman. Hugh Jackman in Les Mis, not just Wolverine. A guy can sing, he can dance, he can act, and he is clearly one of the nicest human beings walking the planet.
Was he in Les Mis?
Yes, he was.
Hugh Jackman?
Yep.
Didn't he play Jean Valjean?
Yep. He sure did.
Yeah, you can't get a bigger role than that.
Nah, he's great though.
I
He's
think the biggest
likable. He's very likable.
I think the biggest mistake with that movie, forgive me, Russell Crowe, but I don't think they should have allowed Russell Crowe to sing. He just didn't quite carry a tune. But that's just
Steve, it's the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah.
Another great recent musical that is very family friendly is the movie Mamma Mia. And
Big.
And they
talk about a hit.
Yeah, it was huge. And, it was based off the Broadway play, but it was amazing how they brought it to screen. And it was a wonderful film. And they're already coming out with their third sequel to it. They've just
Do
announced.
you all believe that Wicked is going to be a hit, guys?
Oh, yeah.
I do.
Very much
You have to believe that, right?
I'm really looking forward to that. It's interesting. The audience for Mamma Mia, primarily young girls and their moms, big part of that audience, is an audience that's very unsatiated these days. And I think the biggest movie of the last probably 20 years, Barbie, was a huge hit because that attracted that audience that's had actually not a lot of movies to see.
No, agreed.
Did you guys see Barbie?
No, but it was.
Yes.
Barbie was one of those.
I tried to.
We went to go see it, and it was fun, but I wasn't the attended audience for it. It was young ladies. It was,
and they loved it, and they went.
Oh yeah,
back.
very much so,
And the whole culture of it. Another film series, which is fantasy, and I know we'll talk about it in our fantasy night, but Harry Potter, I think, has done more for family audiences than any film series of the last 20 years.
What was the rating on that, Steve?
PG-13, I would think.
It had the 13?
Yeah, I'm sure it did, because there's some scary moments in Harry Potter, particularly when they're going around in those dark quarters.
We were talking about some musicals. Have we talked about Music Man? Hello.
Oh,
Sure.
of course, The Music Man
stands up today as if it were brand new. What a great movie!
That's a movie that my wife goes to all the time.
Great show, yeah.
Yeah,
Great movie.
and it's like if she's sitting downstairs alone, I ask her, "What are you watching?" And it's one of two things. It's either The Music Man or Love Actually. Those are her two go-to.
Love
movies.
Actually, whoa!
Yeah,
What a great movie for that genre.
yes, and everything.
What an ending to that movie.
Have to mention the Karate Kid and
Yes.
Karate Kid 2. There was another huge success and kept going.
Yes.
Back to the Future, that group of things kept going.
Well,
Jerry Weintraub, Jerry Weintraub was really one of the outstanding producers of all time, and he was Karate Kid, really a movie that broke through. As far as Barbie goes, Barbie's one of those movies, that comes along and just forms a life of its own for every good reason. But you can't stop when something like that happens. You can't stop it.
It's a juggernaut. It was definitely a juggernaut.
Yeah, a little film that we haven't mentioned yet. A little film, but it was a big hit. Came along after Yours, Mine, and Ours, and it was called With Six You Get Egg Roll.
Yes.
Papa Hope?
No.
Brian
Keith.
No.
Brian Keith.
yeah, Brian Keith.
Forget the girl.
Yep. You also had Steve Martin
Jones
do Cheaper by the Dozen too.
Yes.
The remake.
Yes,
The
exactly.
remake. Yeah.
Steve Martin does a lot of remakes for films, but he's
So
quite
let's
successful at it.
Cheaper by the Dozen is like the quintessential family film, right?
Oh yeah,
Sure.
very much so. Well,
Well,
here's
yes.
somebody we haven't brought up yet, and he made a career of making productions for families. Jim Henson, we should talk about.
And those Muppet
The
movies.
Muppets are a force on its own. And, sadly enough, Jim passed away probably about 20 years ago now. And he was just amazing. The work he did, bringing, originally, he was a little more adult with his puppets, but then he, did Sesame Street and took it from there. And what he did with the Muppets was just amazing.
It ain't so easy.
He started in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And Kermit was originally a girl. So you see, you got to go back in history to figure it out.
Oh, very much so. And if
Same a frog. It was definitely a frogette.
Yes.
With a blonde wig.
It's Go ahead.
This is one of the great movies of all time that I would consider a family film called Yankee Doodle Dandy. Happens to be one of the top 100 or less movies of all time.
Tremendous.
Why not a family film? Great musical. Great
film.
Now, another actor who we know can do kind of off-color material, but I think the bulk of his filmography is family-friendly, is Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy has made some big family hits. And obviously, Beverly Hills Cop is not a family movie per se.
No, not at all.
He did the Dr. Dolittle movie.
Which is a remake.
Absent-minded Professor, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
He did the Absent-Minded Professor.
I'm glad you just mentioned that, guys.
I'm sorry, not the Absent-Minded Professor, Julian, the Nutty Professor.
The Nutty Professor.
Yeah. But I'm glad you mentioned it because we haven't spoken of Jerry Lewis. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were tremendously successful in movies.
They sure were.
I can't, other than the Absent-Minded, it wasn't called the Absent-Minded, it was called Nutty Professor. Wait a minute, what was it called? The
Nutty Professor.
The original was The Nutty with Jerry, and then they remade it with Eddie.
A lot of those movies which made fortunes, I can't even name. My Friend Irma, maybe.
That's how they were introduced.
Yeah.
My Friend Irma and My Friend Irma Goes West. But no, At War with the Army, The Stooge, all these incredible films we grew up with as kids were gigantic, and all the people in show business said, well, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, when they break up, Jerry Lewis is going to have a great career. Dean Martin's through. He's finished.
Yeah.
It didn't exactly happen that way.
No, but they were family movies, Julian, right?
They were absolutely off.
By the way,
Abbott and Costello.
By the way, I was told, and I think this is true, that when they were casting the Young Lions in 1958, Marlon Brando insisted that Dean Martin be cast in the Young Lions. Otherwise, they weren't going to get Brando. So apparently, Dean Martin won that role, and that was his first big dramatic role after his comedies with Jerry, or one of them. And he was good. He was terrific.
Bob Hope and Bing Crosby made a series of movies called the Road Movies,
right?
All family movies.
All family movies. And the last.
Now again, let's get back. We should get back to today. Where are the family movies? Exactly.
I ask that every day. Where are the family movies? Like I said, animated movies are about the only thing you see. The other thing I want to mention that was very popular when I was growing up were service comedies that were all very family oriented. Do you remember Jack Lemmon and Ricky Nelson and The Wackiest Ship in the Army, 1960? That was I was sitting on a couch with Jack Lemmon during the remake of 12 Angry Men, and I turned to him. I said, "Jack, I really enjoyed The Wackiest Ship in the Army." And he gave me a look like,
and he said, "You're the one, right? You're the one?"
I was the only one.
He was also in a little movie called Operation Mad Ball.
Operation Mad Ball, which you always
Who directed it, Steve?
Operation Mad Ball.
Blake Edwards.
Blake Edwards. Oh, my goodness. And, of course, Blake Edwards is responsible for the Pink Panther movies, another big family hit, both original and remake.
I think in Operation Madball, I think Ernie Kovacs was one of the leads in that.
He was in it. And who stole the movie, Jules? Mickey Rooney.
Mickey Rooney.
He was in it for maybe 5 minutes and stole the movie, one of the great 5-minute performances of all time.
And
another Blake.
How could we forget the original 3 gigantic Star Wars movies?
Oh, exactly. I was about to go there with, we have to talk about Star Wars. The original Star Wars was meant as a family movie. It wasn't, it was sci-fi, but it was, based off of all the things that George Lucas grew up with, like Flash Gordon, pirate movies, the little serials that he did. You also had, of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you also want to go for that. Same thing.
Although I don't know, that's a pretty... I agree it's a great family movie, but it for little kids, there are elements of Raiders that scare the living bejesus.
If they don't like snakes, they're in big trouble.
Or spiders, or
but families took their kids to see Jaws.
They did,
and the kids loved it.
They never went back in the ocean.
That's true. One of the other recent ones we had brought up was with Johnny Depp was the Pirates of the Caribbean events.
Pirates of the Caribbean, big family movies. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny because, and maybe you can address this, Julian and Arthur, there was a time when a G rating for a movie was not a plus. I heard that G rating movies were not doing as well. They had to add the PG, so they get a little older kid. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely accurate. But of course, as always, as Arthur can point out, you got a Sound of Music or something like that with a G, and you do great.
Didn't make a difference.
Those things are always so problematic to talk about because they're always wrong.
One last thing that our audience will find fascinating. There were 2 producers named Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, and they had a fight, and so they had a divorce. And the divorce went like this. Harry Saltzman walked away with the rights to The Battle of Britain and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, a family movie that wasn't such a big deal. Nice movie, though. And Cubby Broccoli walked away with the rights to the James Bond movies. Thank you, folks.
Yes.
Actually, that's not quite accurate, Arthur.
Well, it is.
Harry got into trouble. He bought a lot of Technicolor stock and got into major bankruptcy, and he had to sell off his Bond empire, and he sold it to the United Artists so he could pay the bill for Technicolor. I think that there wasn't so much a divorce, and he got the Bond movies.
Well, wait a minute, Steve. I don't want to get into a debate, but it just so happens that Cubby Broccoli did walk away with the Bond films, did he not? And there
half. UA owned Harry's portion.
Half would be fine.
Half would be fine.
Saltzman, they split up.
They split, and he was in terrible financial trouble, and he had to sell off his share of the Bond movies to make good his losses in Technicolor. That's what I know of. I talked.
I understand. Of course.
Yeah, no.
The bottom line is that one got Shitty Bang Bang and one got James Bond.
No, exactly.
Folks.
Arguably the greatest, and to this day, by the way, I refer to the James Bond movies as family movies because they have never really gone into our territory. I think there was one of the movies got close, but they're family entertainment. You can take your 80-year-old grandmother and your
without question.
Yeah, it's true, but you got to be careful with Pussy Galore.
No, you always have to be careful with Pussy Galore.
Today, the kids really, it's nothing. They're kind of numb to all of it. Nothing shocks these kids.
It's true. I'll mention one other title before we finish, and one of my favorites, another Blake Edwards title, Operation Petticoat. Cary Grant, Tony Curtis, Dina Merrill, 1959. One of those service comedies that we really don't see anymore. You don't see service comedies, which I think would be great.
Remember, don't go near the water.
Don't go near the water. 1955. Glenn Ford, Russ Tamblyn, who's going to be on my show in a couple of weeks. I'm going to talk.
Who is Russ Tamblyn?
Russ Tamblyn. I'm going to talk to him about.
What a guest! Whoa,
that was a great guest. He just wrote a book, and I'm going to be interviewing him. I'm very excited.
How old is Russ Tamblyn?
Best thing he ever did to me. 7 Brides for Seven
Brothers. He's in his late 80s.
Yep.
Who was the kid who played in talk about a movie, scary movie, that we would see at like the Loews Grand, and it was the matinee, blah, blah, blah. And it was Skip Homeyer. Julian helped me. And he was a Nazi as a kid. Tomorrow's the World or something
Tomorrow
like that?
the World.
Yeah,
Tomorrow the World.
What a scary movie.
That is the movie, but I don't think I ever saw that film. I love Up, the animated Up.
Fantastic
movie. And that is a family film.
Ed Asner, yeah.
And Shrek. Don't forget Shrek, guys.
Shrek was big. And
Shrek was
another movie that the original was a lot of fun, mid-'60s, Flipper. Spawned a TV series, spawned a terrible remake. Definitely.
We had a little movie at United Arts called Namu the Killer Whale, which was a family movie and actually did some business. Drive-in business was big.
And then there was Clarence the Cross-Eyed Lion.
Yes. But Shrek did look like Harvey. We all understand that, right, Jules? Hello.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dead on. Good casting, Arthur.
So we've come to the end of our show. This has been fun. We could probably do another hour because we keep coming up with, we didn't even mention Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with Keanu Reeves.
Did we talk enough about E.T. and Back to the Future?
Oh, yeah.
Whoa.
But we could have fun like that. But I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed producer, Mike Faber, who keeps us all on the right track.
Thanks, Steve. Somebody has to do it. So, I might as well do it with my family here. So it's perfect. You've reached the end of this episode of the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this here without you. We want to hear from you. So please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. Remember, you can find us wherever fine podcasts are found, and now you can even find us up on our YouTube channel at no extra cost. If you made it this far into this episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? Or if you're listening to us, please give us 5 stars. If you're into social media, please check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys and see what's happening this week on our podcasts. Julian, who are you talking to this week?
This week is Eddie Muller from TCM, the Czar of Noir. We really have fun. He's a terrific guest, and we're everywhere itself, and we're actually live on YouTube as well. So I'm happy to have Eddie Muller.
Awesome. Steve, what's cooking over on Saturday night at the movies?
Well, I have one of my best guests ever because he's a terrific storyteller. His name is Julian Schlossberg, who happens to be our co-host on our show right here. And Julian gets to talk about wonderful stories. He's written his second book. It's called My First Book, Part 2. And it's a page turner. And Julian was absolutely delightful. And weren't you, Julian?
I thought a bit of a stomach turner, but okay. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
He's everywhere. He's everywhere.
Julian is everywhere, and he's a delightful guest and tells great stories.
Awesome.
We're also available now on YouTube.
Excellent. Arthur, what's coming up next week on our podcast?
We're going to be talking about movie score composers. We're going to have Randy Edelman, one of the great ones, and we'll be able to also talk about the John Williams and the greats of this field, composers of musical scores. Fantastic genre, so we'll have a good time doing that. And Steve, I want to just mention you had a guest, Jerry Offsay. I happened to hear your show because I kind of knew of Jerry. I wanted to hear about him. He was as great a guest as you'll ever have.
Wind Jerry up and he'll go forever. Now.
It was great.
Terrific guy.
Nice.
He ran Showtime for 10 years, greenlit 300 movies, and just is a delightful man. Thank you. Thank you for the plug.
On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your producer and announcer, Mike Faber, and we'll see you here next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Hi, I'm Joe Heath.
And I'm Tony Heath.
And we're the hosts of the Watchathon of Rassilon.
A podcast where we used to talk about all of classic Doctor Who.
But we finished all of that.
So now, we're talking about New Who.
Well, old New Who.
Right, the Russell T Davies era.
Well, the old Russell T Davies era.
Yeah, the David Tennant stuff.
Well, the old David Tennant stuff.
The Watchathon of Rassilon.
Your podcast for old, new, and old new Doctor Who.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.